You walk into a pharmacy today and you expect miracles, antibiotic, painkillers, anti-inflammatories. Modern medicine feels like it was handed down from heaven, fully formed, perfectly understood. But here's the thing, almost none of it was invented by someone sitting in a lab thinking, I'm going to discover medicine today. Most of your medicine came from people stumbling around in the dark, eating things they shouldn't have eaten, and accidentally not dying. Your ancestors didn't have chemists. They didn't have laboratories. They didn't even have the concept of germ theory. What they had was curiosity, desperation, and millions of years of trial and error written into their bodies. And somehow, through pure accident, they discovered compounds that would eventually save billions of lives. Let's start with something simple. Pain. Your back aches. Your head throbs. Your tooth screams. For most of human history, there was no painkiller waiting in your medicine cabinet. There was only suffering. But then, somewhere in the fog of prehistory, someone did something that seemed completely unrelated to pain relief. They chewed on tree bark, not on purpose, not because they were thinking, I wonder if this will help my headache. They probably chewed on bark because they were bored or hungry or their gums hurt from some infection. And then something strange happened. The pain went away. The fever broke. The inflammation subsided. What was actually happening? That person was ingesting salicin, a compound that their body would later convert into salicylic acid. They had no name for it. They had no understanding of chemistry, but they had stumbled onto one of the most powerful natural painkillers ever discovered. Thousands of years later, a chemist named Charles Gerhardt would isolate and modify that compound, and you would know it as aspirin. Aspirin is now taken by over 100 million people every single day. It prevents heart attacks. It stops strokes. It's in more medicine cabinets than almost any other drug on earth. And it started with someone just chewing bark. Now think about fever. Fever is terrifying when you don't understand it. Your body burns. You hallucinate. You think you're dying. And your ancestors thought they were dying too. So they did what humans do when they're desperate. They tried everything. And somewhere, someone noticed that if you boiled the bark of a willow tree and drank the liquid, the fever would break. Again, pure accident. Again, they were accessing salicin, but they didn't know that. They just knew that this tree helped, so the knowledge passed down, tribe to tribe, generation to generation. By the time written history began, willow bark was already recognized medicine. But aspirin is just the beginning. There's a much stranger story hiding inside medicine cabinets everywhere. Digitalis, digoxin. These are heart medications that you probably take for granted, but they come from foxglove, a plant so poisonous that eating the leaves can kill you in hours. How did anyone discover that a deadly poison could also save your heart? Simple. People started dying, and then people stopped dying. And then people tried to figure out why. In the 1700s, an English physician named William Withering was treating a patient with severe heart failure. The woman was dying. Her heart was failing. The standard medicine of the time had done nothing. Then a folk herbalist treated her with a tea made from foxglove leaves, and something remarkable happened. Her heart steadied. Her breathing improved. She lived. Withering became obsessed. He studied foxglove systematically for 10 years. He tested it on patient after patient. He measured the doses carefully. What he discovered was that digitalis, the active compound in foxglove, actually affects the electrical signals in your heart. It forces the heart muscle to contract more forcefully with each beat. It was the first time anyone had truly understood how a plant compound affected the human body at a mechanical level. But Withering didn't discover this by pure accident. He built on centuries of folk knowledge, centuries of people just trying things and seeing if they survived, centuries of accidental scientists. Now we're going to talk about something much darker. Poison, strychnine, curare, arsenic. These are substances that your ancestors knew would kill you, but they also discovered, through the most brutal trial and error imaginable, that some of these same compounds, in incredibly small doses, could cure things that seemed incurable. Curare is a plant-derived poison used by indigenous peoples in South America for hunting. A tiny amount on an arrow tip would paralyze a jaguar. A larger dose would stop your heart completely. For centuries, Western medicine ignored it as useless, just a deadly plant toxin. But in the 1940s, researchers realized something shocking. Curare could be used in surgery. If you're operating on someone, their muscles are constantly tensing and contracting. It makes surgery nearly impossible. You're trying to repair a heart, and the heart keeps moving. You're trying to remove a tumor, and the muscles keep spasming. But curare, in microscopic, carefully controlled doses, could paralyze those muscles just enough for surgery. It gave surgeons the still, unmoving field they needed. Thousands of lives were saved because someone finally looked at a poison and asked, "What if we used this very, very carefully?" This pattern repeats throughout the entire history of medicine. Cocaine, aspirin, morphine, digitalis, quinine, penicillin, all of them came from plants. All of them were discovered accidentally. All of them were discovered because humans were desperate and curious enough to try things. But there's something even stranger underneath all of this. Your ancestors weren't just randomly trying plants. They were watching animals. They were paying attention. A researcher named Janine Benyus calls this biomimicry, learning from nature. But your ancestors were doing this long before the word existed. They watched chimpanzees chewing on medicinal plants when they were sick. They watched birds eating clay to counteract toxins in their food. They watched every animal around them and asked the fundamental question, what if that works for us too? There's a famous study by zoologist Michael Huffman, who documented wild chimpanzees in Tanzania deliberately seeking out and consuming plants that have no nutritional value, plants that their normal diet doesn't include. The researchers ran chemical analysis on these plants and discovered they contained powerful anti-parasitic and anti-inflammatory compounds. The chimpanzees weren't trained by anyone. No one taught them. They were self-medicating. Your ancestors did the same thing. They watched animals. They copied them. They got sick less often as a result. And the people who paid attention to animals survived. The people who didn't died. So now, inside your DNA, you carry millions of years of this encoded knowledge, this instinct to pay attention to what works. This is why, in the modern world, the most effective new medicines still come from nature. Pharmaceutical companies send researchers into rainforests and deep jungles looking for plants that indigenous peoples have been using for healing. They're not being romantic or nostalgic. They're following the data. They know that if a plant has been used as medicine for hundreds of years, there's probably a real chemical reason why. But here's where the story gets complicated, because while your ancestors were brilliant at discovering what worked, they had absolutely no idea why it worked. Aspirin didn't just reduce pain, it also prevented blood clots. Your ancestors didn't know that. They just knew it helped. So sometimes they used it in situations where it made things worse. A woman in labor might chew willow bark to reduce the pain of contractions, but aspirin thins the blood. It can cause dangerous bleeding. No one knew that because no one understood the mechanism. It's a reminder that accidental discovery is powerful, but it's also blind. It works until it doesn't. And sometimes people die to teach you why. This is why modern medicine is different. Modern medicine asks not just does this work, but why does this work? We sequence the molecules, we map the proteins, we understand the mechanism, and when we understand the mechanism, we can use it better. We can reduce doses, we can combine treatments, we can prevent side effects. But underneath all that science, all those fancy labs and computers and genetic sequencers, the fundamental question hasn't changed in 200,000 years. Your ancestors asked it in the forest. You're asking it now in hospitals around the world. Does this help? Or does this hurt? Your body is a walking pharmacy of compounds your ancestors discovered through pure accident. Whenever you take an aspirin, you're using knowledge that came from someone chewing bark. Whenever you take antibiotics, you're using discoveries that came from contaminated petri dishes and curious scientists who looked at mold and wondered, why didn't that bacteria grow? Whenever you take any medicine at all, you're relying on millions of years of people trying things and seeing what didn't kill them. Modern medicine likes to present itself as separate from nature, as a triumph over nature. But it's the opposite. Modern medicine is nature understood. It's the same medicines your ancestors stumbled upon, but now we know why they work. We can make them safer. We can make them stronger. We can give them to you with confidence instead of hope. But you still can't just try anything. You still can't eat random tree bark and expect it to cure you, because the difference between medicine and poison is often just the dose. The difference between healing and harm is understanding. Your ancestors were brilliant at discovery, but terrible at explanation. They saved your life, but they couldn't tell you why. Now you can. Now you understand the mechanism. And the next time you swallow a pill, any pill, remember what that really is. It's a 200,000-year conversation between you and every human who came before you. It's an answer to a question they asked in the dark. It's proof that the medicine you need was always hiding in plain sight. You just had to know where to look. And now you do.